Welcome to Impact OC, the only program showcasing the people and organizations shaping Orange County. With your host, Don Camber.
Hello, live from the OC Talk Radio studios at UCI's Buell Applied Innovation Center. I'm OC Talk Radio Public Affairs Director Don Camber with another great guest positively impacting our community. Today, I welcome United to End Homelessness Executive Director Becks Heyhoe. The organization, empowered by Orange County United Way, is committed to reducing homelessness in Orange County to functional zero, where episodes of homelessness are rare, brief, and non-reoccurring. Thank you, Becks, for being on Impact OC.
Thanks so much for having me, Dawn. I'm excited for our conversation.
Becks, I'd like you to define homelessness. I've heard the terms unhoused and unsheltered.
Yeah, when we talk about homelessness, there are a lot of different ways that the terms can be used, and we have two federal departments that each have their own definition of homelessness, so that gets added into the confusion when we're talking about what homelessness means. So we have HUD, Department of Housing and Urban Development, we have the Department of Education. They both use the term homelessness, but it means slightly different things for each department. So I'll start with HUD. HUD, when they're saying homelessness, they mean somebody that lacks the adequate, safe, fixed abode. So probably what we think of when we're traditionally thinking about homelessness, somebody who's sleeping outside, or perhaps somebody who's temporarily staying in an emergency shelter. Somebody living in their car, for example, would be considered homeless under HUD's definition. Then they start talking about different subpopulations of people experiencing homelessness, so older adults, transitional age youth, families, and chronic homelessness. Chronic homelessness is a really important term for people to know. It's referring to a specific group of people who are living outside, who are unsheltered, or perhaps in an emergency shelter. They don't have a permanent home, a permanent address, and they have been homeless for over 12 months, and they have a disabling condition. So chronic homelessness is referring to people who have really got very significant health challenges and have been homeless for a long period of time. The Department of Education's definition is just looking at children. So they're looking at minors, and so it's a different world that they're looking at. And then when they're talking about what it means to be homeless in the Department of Education's world, it includes HUD's definition, so children who are perhaps in their car, sleeping outside, in an emergency shelter, and then it broadens it to include children that are living doubled up, tripled up, couch surfing, perhaps in a hotel or motel. So it's a much broader definition under the Department of Education.
What about unhoused and unsheltered?
So those are terms that we often hear that are all sort of trying to describe people who are experiencing homelessness. So they're sort of used intermittently depending on the person who's speaking and perhaps on the audience. And so there's a lot of power in the words that we use. And so generally speaking, if I'm having a conversation with somebody experiencing homelessness, I'll ask them how they would like to be referred to. Would they like to be referred to as somebody who is experiencing homelessness, as somebody who's unhoused, as somebody who's unsheltered? Are all sort of implying the same thing, but it's trying to give somebody the dignity of making that determination for themselves rather than us perhaps using terminology for them.
With that said, what is the most common term they want to hear?
It really differs, and across the homelessness sector, there are different thoughts on it. So you'll hear different agencies that are working in this space use different terminology. We at Orange County United Way have been using the terms experiencing homelessness rather than saying homeless people. So really trying to differentiate that the fact that somebody is without a home, that's not the only thing that defines them as a human being.
Well, please share with us the latest point-in-time homeless count results.
Yeah, so Orange County is required by HUD, just like every other community that receives federal funding to address homelessness, to do a count every 2 years. So we last did one in 2022, so 2024, it was time to do the count again. It involves sending out a huge amount of volunteers to scour our 34 cities over a 3-day period. Teams go out morning and night to discover people who are unsheltered, so people who are living outside over that 3-day period. They're also able to ask them a number of questions in the survey. And then alongside that, we're also looking at how many people were in emergency shelters. So some kind of temporary shelter situation to provide that safe roof over their head. So the grand total of people over those 3 days was 7,322 people. 4,173 of those were unsheltered, so outside, and 3,149 of those people were in a shelter.
What kind of questions were asked?
So the survey, you're very limited on what you can ask. HUD has very strict requirements about what you can ask, but it's trying to understand things like, perhaps is there a minor child in the household? Does the respondent have any ties to Orange County? For example, do they have family members here? Have they ever worked in Orange County, gone to school? Are they enrolled in school? Where was their last address before they fell into homelessness? It also asks some questions around health, physical health, mental health, substance abuse. It covers a lot of topics, well, as much as you can fit into a shortened survey.
And to get that homeless count, you relied on many volunteers.
Absolutely. So the County of Orange contracts with an agency called CityNet. CityNet takes the lead on the unsheltered part of the count. So they are the ones recruiting the volunteers, training the volunteers, deploying the volunteers across the county. And then the sheltered part of the count, 211, which is a part of Orange County United Way, takes the lead on the sheltered count. And all that data gets combined, is fed back up to HUD to provide information speaking about what's happening at a state level, at a national level on homelessness, and then locally we use it here as well.
So what did the results tell you?
Yeah, I think there's a massive amount of information that was gathered in the point in time count. So some things that I think is important to highlight is that, yes, the numbers have gone up over the last, since the last point in time count. When we're looking regionally, Orange County is trending very similarly with our neighbors, but we're actually seeing a slower rate of growth of homelessness overall than our surrounding counties if we look over a 5-year period. So over a 5-year period, our neighbors have increased in homelessness by about 29%, and Orange County 7% over 5 years. It is a more dramatic jump between 2022 and 2024, but 2019 to 2024, we're seeing actually a lower rate of homelessness increasing in Orange County. So that is encouraging to me. Some things that are perhaps not so encouraging is that we did see a rise in the number of veterans experiencing homelessness, a rise in the number of young people aged 18 to 24 experiencing homelessness, and a rise in the number of adults over the age of 62 experiencing homelessness.
So what are the causes of homelessness?
Great question. And this is something that I think is really important to talk about. Orange County is an extremely expensive place to live, and I'm sure that anybody who's watching or listening is not surprised to hear that. And the research that has been done locally in Orange County and across the state, actually last year, UC Heyhoe produced a fantastic report looking at homelessness in California, and that really highlighted what we've seen to be happening here in Orange County, that it is the high cost of living that is the main driver into homelessness. You know, oftentimes we hear people talking about mental health or substance abuse as being like the primary causes of homelessness. And they're certainly in the mix, but they're not the primary drivers into homelessness. We have a housing crisis in Orange County. We do not have enough housing here in our community for people who need it. We don't have enough housing that's affordable to the people that are working in Orange County. And so anytime we have housing costs going up and up and up, and income levels are not going up at the same rate, we see a big increase in homelessness.
So what are the biggest misconceptions people have about homeless people?
I think a lot of people feel like everybody who is experiencing homelessness is mentally ill or has a substance abuse problem. And part of me understands why that might be the perception when we think about homelessness that is visible. If we're walking down the street and we see somebody who's perhaps visibly distressed, visibly anxious, and showing symptoms perhaps of a mental health diagnosis, that sticks with us, that resonates, we clock that, and it's easy to take that one experience and use that to sort of determine that everybody else experiencing homelessness must have similar characteristics or traits because that's what we encountered. But a lot of the time, we're walking past people who are homeless and we have no idea that they are experiencing homelessness. There's a lot of hidden homelessness in Orange County. We have families sleeping in their cars that us and the general public may never stumble across. And so I think if I could sort of really highlight that, that somebody who's perhaps chronic homeless, who's experiencing significant health issues that are visible, they do not represent everybody who's experiencing homelessness in our community.
So share with us some stories.
Yeah, so we were chatting earlier a little bit about some of the rise in homelessness, particularly for seniors in Orange County, and are sharing about a program that United Way actually runs. Our United to End Homelessness initiative, we have a couple of programs that we run in the community helping to end homelessness and also to prevent people falling into homelessness. I was sharing a story about a senior lady who lives in Orange County who'd been renting her apartment for, over 20 years. Her rent had been increasing and increasing and increasing, and it increased to the point where she just couldn't sustain it anymore. And so she was trying to find a roommate, trying to get creative about that, struggling to do that. If you've never had to rent out a room in your apartment before and you don't know how to do that, that's pretty daunting to do that. But she found out that a local community college was able to help place a foreign exchange student in her home. But in order to do that, she had to provide a bed, a desk, and a chair, and she didn't have the funds to be able to do that. Well, through our Whatever It Takes program, we were able to provide the funding for those items to get her set up so that now she can have the foreign exchange student come and move in with her, and this way she's able to stay in her home, and we've been able to prevent her from falling into homelessness. So that's just an example of the kinds of people we were able to help her, but there are many others who sadly, don't have access to those kinds of resources who might end up experiencing homelessness here.
So talk about some of your programs.
So we have run a couple of programs that are specifically trying to help people get housed. So one of our programs is called Welcome Home OC. We've been running that program for the last about 5 years. And we have a group of property owners that we work with, well over 100 owners who are part of our network who offer us apartments in their portfolio when they become open. And then we help to place people who have been experiencing homelessness, who have a rental assistance voucher from one of the local housing authorities. We're able to sort of match them to available inventory and help them to move in to end their homelessness. We make sure they have furniture, make sure that the agency providing support to them has got funding to provide that case management support services, make sure the property owner, receives payment for their security deposit, any holding fees, and we've been able to house over 1,070 people through that program so far.
Now, people who get help from you, do they have to do anything to get that help?
By the time somebody has reached us in this program, yes, they have had to go over, they've had to do a lot. They've had to work with a service provider to complete all of the paperwork and the assessments, to apply for a voucher from one of the local housing authorities. We have 4 housing authorities here. Orange County Housing Authority, Santa Ana, Anaheim, and Garden Grove each have their own housing authority. They've had to complete all of the paperwork specific to that housing authority, all of the paperwork specific to the type of voucher that they are applying for. There's lots of different special purpose vouchers. And then in order to move in, to sign a lease, they've had to pay for their portion of the first month of rent. So for anybody that receives a voucher, 30% of their income goes towards their housing, and the voucher helps to cover the rest of that payment.
So they have to be working.
They don't have to be working. Many people are receiving SSI or perhaps are on some other kind of fixed income. And so 30% of that goes towards their rent.
What are the demographics of the homelessness?
So I can give me one moment. So the latest demographics for the point in time count we had, let's see, for the unsheltered, we had about 27% were age 35 to 44. Age 62 to 64 was about 5%. Over the age of 65 was 5% who were unsheltered. For those who were sheltered, it was just over 9% of our shelter population were over the age of 65. In terms of gender breakdown, it was about, for unsheltered, about 27% of those who were living outside were female versus those who were sheltered. It was about, or just under 45%. For males unsheltered, about 72%, a significant drop. Then when we look at males in shelter, about 55% of those who were sheltered were identifying as male. In terms of transgender, it was about 0.3% identified as transgender in unsheltered, 0.1% identifying as transgender in the shelter. So we do see a big disproportion there for those identifying as transgender.
Have you talked to many homeless people?
I have.
So how does it feel to be homeless? What do they tell you?
The thing that has always resonated with me is that people feel overlooked and they feel invisible, and they don't feel like others sort of even really acknowledge their existence.
So what can we, the public, do to help?
I think with that, being able to say hello and being able to recognize the shared humanity that we have. You know, I grew up in Ireland. We have a very different culture there. When you're walking down the street and you walk past somebody, you say hello. America, it's not quite the same, but you know, you'll often perhaps make eye contact with somebody. You might smile. If you're feeling extra friendly that day, you might say hello. And I think just being able to, you know, even look somebody in the eye, acknowledge that they're there, you know, not crossing the street to avoid them, or you know, just treating them and acknowledging them in the way that you would acknowledge anybody else that you were perhaps walking past.
And you were telling me that many people fear that they could become homeless.
Yeah, we actually did a study with UCI last year. I should say UCI did the study. We helped promote the results. The OC poll came back around, and last year it found that homelessness and housing affordability were the top issues that people in Orange County were worried about. Over 50% of renters had been worried that they weren't going to be able to pay their rent and might perhaps fall into homelessness. That's over half the people who are renting. And 20% of mortgage payers had been worried in the last year that they weren't going to be able to pay their mortgage and could be potentially facing foreclosure.
So how can people avoid homelessness?
That is a great question. And it's very unique to everybody's individual situation in terms of how to stabilize their housing. I think anything that is such a huge question. Being able to increase your income or have your income sort of being able to match your expenses. And so whatever that might look like in somebody's unique situation, we see a lot of college students that don't, move out. They choose to stay home because they can't afford to both, study and pay for accommodations at the same time. So it's very unique to each person who's in that situation.
So when you get someone shelter, is it long-term shelter, temporary shelter?
Yeah, there's two main sort of types of shelter that we talk about, emergency shelter and transitional shelters. And sometimes each of those have different names, but the basic premise of an emergency shelter is to help somebody get off the streets pretty quickly. They tend to be congregate shelters, so a large volume of people in one place. Not always, but they tend to be operating like that. The goal is, once somebody's in shelter, to be able to help them connect to our overall homelessness system of response. And we have a part of that called the coordinated entry system. And so really, when somebody's in shelter, you're trying to make sure that you've done their paperwork to get them into the coordinated entry system. The coordinated entry system is then able to match people with resources that are available to help resolve their homelessness. And so once somebody is able to be matched to one of those opportunities, then that's when they've got the chance and the resource to be able to resolve their homelessness. The challenge that we're seeing, though, is that we have so much demand for those resources. It's only about 13% of people in our coordinated entry system that will actually be matched to a resource. So we have this huge backlog of people who have done everything we've asked them to do. They've filled out all of our forms, they've handed over their documentation, then they are just waiting for one of those precious opportunities.
What are some of the resources?
Some of the resources would be vouchers, like I was talking about a little earlier, that our public housing authorities issue. Another kind of resource would be rapid rehousing. So that is funding that's provided. There's a case manager that works with the household, and then some funding is provided for rent. And then that rental assistance, it tapers down over time, allowing the family, and the hope is that the household would be able to fully take over their bills and their rent during the period of time that they're enrolled in the rapid rehousing program.
And children are often homeless.
We do have children experiencing homelessness in Orange County, unfortunately, yes.
So how do you help them?
So we don't have enough emergency shelters for families who are experiencing homelessness. Very similar, actually, for our 18 to 24-year-olds. So there are very significant wait lists for families who have children who are experiencing homelessness, as well as our 18 to 24-year-olds. So sadly, they are placed, onto a wait list for an opportunity in one of those shelters to open up, to be able to help them move into that shelter, where hopefully then they'll be part of the coordinated entry system to help match them to one of those resources to resolve their crisis.
Do encampments exist all over Orange County?
Certainly are encampments in Orange County, but we don't have anything like sort of some of the situation that perhaps the large cities to our north and our south have. We don't have anything to that scale.
So where are they living if they're not having permanent housing?
So we have sort of pockets of people experiencing homelessness all throughout the county. So the point in time count shows the data. We call it by service provision area. So it gets shortened to SPA. So we talk about the county in north, south, and central Orange County. Of course, I can't find my map easily. So the north region had about 3,227 people experiencing homelessness. Central was a little bit higher than that at 3,454, and the south part of the county significantly lower at 641 people experiencing homelessness.
Now that you have the numbers, what's going to happen with those numbers?
So these numbers will go back to HUD at the sort of federal level to help sort of with the assignment of federal funding to communities all across America. HUD funnels funding to local communities through an entity called the Continuum of Care. So we have the Orange County Continuum of Care. That's a board that is responsible for the oversight of HUD's funding. And now a lot of state funding is also given to Continuums of Care to create programs and resources to help address homelessness. And then the data is also used locally. I actually host where a sort of reversed version of this, where I bring experts on. And just last week, I was interviewing Doug Becks, who is the director of the Office of Care Coordination for the County of Orange, about the point in time count data. And really, we were getting into a great dialogue about how the county, is looking at this data. But at the moment, I think we're still in a place of really absorbing it, looking at it. The data brings a lot of questions to mind, and I think that's a really good thing. Such as, one of the pieces around veterans homelessness was that the majority of veterans experiencing homelessness are outside. They are not in our shelters. So that begs the question, why? So we have work to do as a community to really try to understand why that has shifted. It was not the same in 2022. And so those are some of the kinds of questions that we're seeing coming out of the data that now as a community we need to wrestle with and go seek some answers.
Now that was a point in time. That means that number could be much higher as we speak right now.
Absolutely. This is just one data set that is exactly as you were saying. It's referencing that moment in time. It does not reflect the volume of people that will experience homelessness over a 12-month period.
But it sounds like there's a lot of resources available to help.
Yes and no. We have resources, and our community has done a really good job at bringing new resources online. We have new emergency shelters that have come online since the last point in time count. We've had new issues of new allocations of vouchers to help address homelessness. We've opened more permanent supportive housing in the last few years. And so there definitely are things that our county is doing really well resource-wise. But in terms of preventing people from falling into homelessness, that is an area where I think we have some room for growth and room for improvement as a community. The point in time count when they surveyed those who were unsheltered, 48%, I believe, had experienced homelessness for the first time in 12 months. So almost 50% of people had become homeless in the last 12 months of those who are outside. And that's pretty staggering. So these are people who have just fallen in, and we didn't have the ability to prevent them from falling into homelessness. So we need to do both. We need to help those who have sadly become unhoused, and we need to help make sure that people who are unstably housed are able to have pathways to be stably housed.
Well, when they fell into it for the first time, what did they go through?
Yeah, we would need to ask them what that experience was like. I don't want to kind of put, I don't want to speak for them.
But I would imagine it's frightening.
I mean, I can imagine that not knowing where you're going to go, having to perhaps put your children into your car, your most precious belongings into your car, wondering, how you're going to survive the temperatures at night. People forget it does get cold here. Our winters, we can have some pretty harsh nights that we're not expecting in Southern California. And to be then trying to think through how you're going to access food, how you're going to access showers, how you're going to keep your clothes clean, all of the things that we take for granted, but all of the things that you will need to stay healthy, but also to be able to, if you have employment, and many people who are unhoused do have employment, they are employed, they are working, they're just not earning enough to be able to afford the rent that they were once, paying. But can you imagine trying to figure out how to go to work or how to get a job if you can't figure out how to get clean and how to make sure that your clothes are clean and presentable?
Thank you, United to End Homelessness Executive Director Becks Heyhoe, for being on Impact OC. And I thank everyone for tuning in. I'm OC Talk Radio Public Affairs Director Dawn Camber. Have an impactful day.
You've been listening to Impact OC, the only program showcasing the people and organizations shaping our community. Right here on Orange County's only community radio station, OC Talk Radio.